Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Zhang Jun, distinguished guests, leaders of the Chinese business community, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special event in honour of the Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Kevin Rudd. Once again, before we commence the program, in consideration of the Prime Minister and your fellow guests, please now kindly switch off your mobile phones. AustCham is privileged to be part of the Prime Minister's visit to China, and I would like to thank our key sponsor, ANZ, and other sponsors, AIMS, BHP Billiton, GNS, Macquarie Bank, Telstra Census, and UniWorld for their support in staging tonight's function. And now, without any further delay, please stand and give a very warm Beijing welcome to the Prime Minister and other members of the official party, including some board members of AustCham. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honourable Kevin Rudd, MP, Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Graham, and Senator, the Honourable Penny Wong, Minister for Climate Change and Water. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is Mr. Rudd's first Beijing as Australia's Prime Minister. But he has a strong connection to China spanning many years. Prime Minister, as Illuminant, you are becoming well known in China thanks to your excellent Mandarin skills. In recognition that your busy schedule may keep you from your language studies in the future, we would like to give you AustCham's Dictionary of Colourful Phrases. We hope it serves as a small token of our appreciation for joining us this evening. I invite you to now share some of your insights on your visit and the future of a bilateral relationship with China. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John Pendergast, the Chairman of AustCham, my good friend Vice Minister Zhang Jun from the International Department, Vice Minister Mr. Dr. Wang Min from the Ministry of Land and Resources, Vice Minister Mr. Dr. Chung Jin Pei from the Ministry of Science and Technology, Assistant Minister Mr. Liu Jieyi from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Australian Minister for Climate Change, who's with me, Senator Penny Wong. Welcome to you, Penny. We have China's Ambassador to Australia, Zhang Jun Sai. We have Australia's Ambassador to China, Jeff Raby. Representatives of Chinese business, and I thank them all for being here tonight. Mr. Xia Yaqing, Chairman of and CEO of the Aluminium Corporation of China. Mr. Kong Dan, Chairman of the China International Trust and Investment Corporation, CITIC. Mr. Huang Tianwen, the President of Sino Steel. Mr. Zhou Jiping, the Vice President of the China National Petroleum Corporation. Mr. Jesse Wang, Vice Chairman of the Central Huijin Investment Company. Mr. Zhu Yinlai, CEO of the China International Capital Corporation. Mr. Huan Long, Vice President of the Huanan Group. AustCham members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all the representatives of our friends here in China. 晚上好. The 首先我要欢迎我们中国来的朋友。今天晚上有许多的中国公司来参加今天晚上的活动。 从澳洲的看法来讲，你们是特别欢迎。我们双方关系的前景了不起。因此，关于我们中国来的公司，尤其这么有名的公司的高级官员以及政府部门的高级官员，我们觉得十分荣幸有机会今天晚上接待你们，谢谢大家。I first came to Beijing to work in the 1980s. That was a long time ago, and I haven't changed a bit. I was working at the embassy. In those days, I was here with my wife, Therese, and we lived at the apartments at Jingleman Y, at Shihaolo, Yizheng. And we came to live here in Beijing with our little daughter, whose name was Jessica. And it was a wonderful time that we had. I remember also the time that we were here for our first winter. And for our friends in Beijing, you will know what winter can be like here sometimes, which is very, very cold. Very, very cold. And so, because our apartment was on the ground floor of Shihaolo, when the weather turned cold, we were greeted by lots of local friends. They were called mice and rats. They came into the building. And our ayi at the time said, 放心吧, 放心吧, 他们就是老虎. And I said, no. These are rats and mice. And my wife became increasingly paranoid. We spent a lot of time dealing with the challenge. And it became more and more difficult as the winter wore on. So much so that my wife decided to move in with a colleague's family upstairs and left me downstairs to control the rats and mice. For our Australian friends here this evening, what I then did was, through the embassy, is we sent a message to Canberra, send ratsack now. Ratsack for our Chinese friends is a particular device that you use for poisoning rats. The Department of Foreign Affairs, being very, very efficient that it is, decided to send the ratsack by ship. It arrived at the end of the winter. We then, however, spent a lot of time dealing with each of these individual rats who came to like our apartment very much. And my wife was still living upstairs with our friends. And I do remember coming home one day to see our ayi, whose name was Sun Ayi, Sun Zhongshan de Sun. And she said that we'd got rid of them all except for one. And we had a cook working with us at the same time, whose name was Mr. Wang. Mr. Wang was a very good cook. And I came home and he said he had finally got rid of the last rat. And I said, how did you do that? He said, well, I was cooking the meal and suddenly it appeared, this big rat, and I had to do something about it. And so what I did was I used a kung fu kick, got the rat, knocked it down on the floor and jumped on it. And I said, I don't believe that. And he then presented me with a pair of his previous pair of trousers with a big split down the trousers and charged me 5块钱 to get them fixed. That was the beginning of the Chinese reform movement. How could you earn a profit on a simple transaction? But it was part of a great time that we had in China together. Therese and I spent so much of those 2 years driving around Beijing, driving around the villages around Beijing, and getting to know so much of this great city. It was a great opportunity for us all. Back in those days, there were in fact no private cars on the streets and very few taxis. The reform process had commenced only 6 years earlier in the countryside, with farmers being allowed to sell produce in their open market. The impact of the reform process on cities was just beginning. At that time, the degree of China's contact with the mainstream of the international economy was still limited. China had not yet begun to really enmesh with the world. You could see signs that things were changing, that few would have imagined that in 25 years' time, China would now be driving global growth. In fact, it was only when I visited Shanghai in the early 1990s and saw restaurants showing for the first time neon lights and fairy lights that I came to the conclusion that things had begun to really change. Just imagine how different Beijing used to look without any neon signs. It's impossible to think. I'm really pleased to have the chance to address senior members of the business community, both the Australian and the Chinese business representatives, because it is largely through your efforts that we have the remarkable economic relationship that we have today. My visit here is an effort to do some of that groundwork, and I want to expand on the economic relationship with China. We already have a strong trade in energy, in resources and in agriculture. We have a solid trade in manufactured goods. Our services trade has huge scope to develop. Another purpose of my visit is to engage China on this country's participation in the regional and global order, to talk with China's leaders about the challenges we face, like the response globally to climate change, and how we deal with security challenges like those which still exist on the Korean Peninsula. I come at a time of considerable challenge to the international economy, when global financial markets are in a period of flux. This means that it's an important time for us all to coordinate our responses to the uncertainties in global financial markets. And that has been the subject of many of my discussions with the United States President, President Bush and his administration, with the British government led by Gordon Brown and his officials, and also is an important aspect of my visit to this country. In Australia, we have a new government which I lead. It's committed to maintaining responsible economic management into the future. We have a full agenda to build a stronger economy into the future as well. Our agenda is about lifting productivity. We are focusing on improving the skills base in Australia, and we'll begin investing in education at all levels. We're also focusing on improving infrastructure. We need to have the right physical infrastructure, covering everything from road and rail networks, ports and broadband, to enable businesses to get on with the job of innovating and trading. In the 21st century, in an increasingly interconnected world, we need to make sure that Australia remains competitive in a global market, a challenge for all of our economies. We need to keep supporting and investing in our traditional areas of strength, the resources trade and agriculture. We are also developing new industries. Australia is an innovative country, and I've today, and this afternoon and this evening, been launching one of those innovative products in this very building, and I congratulate the companies concerned. We have a robust economy, and we have a broad-based economy, and it will be a dynamic economy into the future, and I'm proud to lead that economy. Today and yesterday, I've had meetings with a range of people here in China. And today in particular, I had the opportunity of spending a good number of hours with Premier Wen Jiabao and his senior ministers, and had a very enjoyable conversation with him over lunch. I also met with the new Vice Premier, Li Keqiang, and we had a very good discussion as well as with Mr. Wu Bangguo, the Chairman of the NPC. And I look forward tomorrow and the next day to having the opportunity of spending time with Hu Jintao, the President of China and the General Secretary of the party, down at Boao. I also look forward to the weather in Boao, down at Hainan. These have been good meetings and good discussions. We've covered many aspects of our bilateral economic relationship directly of relevance to this chamber. What we have also discussed at great length is how do we go about expanding our existing economic relationship. In particular, we discussed the need to ensure that the free trade negotiations between our two countries are accelerated. We believe that this is an important framework for the future to ensure that we have the best possible bilateral trading arrangements which enable businesses such as those which you represent in this room to become even more productive in their negotiations with each other, in the transactions with each other, and in the underpinnings of those negotiations. Free trade negotiations are always sensitive. They're difficult negotiations because they go to the core of individual national economic interests. They've already been underway for some years, but I'm optimistic, given our discussions today with Premier Wen Jiabao and with his senior ministers, that we have a renewed commitment to accelerate the conclusion of those free trade negotiations. Of course, we will need to take practical steps to make sure that progress is kept on track. And the Minister for Trade, Simon Crean, will be here next week, and he and his counterpart will sit down and develop a roadmap to identify remaining obstacles and find solutions to those obstacles. I'm also keen to develop ties between the services sectors of our two economies. Australia's financial services sector, for example, is world-class. The strength of our regulatory system for the financial services sector is also world-class. I was pleased yesterday to have lunch with Australian financial services firms, including all of our leading banks, many of whom are here tonight as well. At that lunch, we had a good discussion with Chinese regulators and senior bankers about how to promote increased opportunities in the sector. I made the point that in the face of global financial turbulence, Australia's regulators and companies had useful experience to offer China. And I asked our friends in China to allow greater access, in particular, for Australian funds managers to operate here in the People's Republic. We also will be examining that through future engagement between our two governments and our two countries. As China integrates more and more with the global economy, China will need a world-class financial services sector to help facilitate the work of its companies and companies operating in China. China can also benefit from a whole range of specialised services offered by Australian firms. Australian companies in this country have been remarkably successful, and I look forward to further successes in the future. Some of the more obvious recent examples of success have been in areas of architectural design, engineering services, landscape design and operational planning. But there's much more scope for us to do more in this whole field with China. That's why I was so pleased when Premier Wen Jiabao today agreed with my proposal to establish a ministerial-level services roundtable. Its priority will begin work in the area of the financial services sector, and I look forward to practical outcomes from that roundtable in the future. What we want is to provide a boost for the services sector because of the importance it plays in the economy as a driver of innovation. I said in my discussions earlier today with Vice Premier Li Keqiang that in fact we should see our economy and our economic relationship as built on these important pillars. One, the traditional pillar of the resources trade, the energy trade, the raw materials trade and the agricultural trade, a very strong pillar. The second, which is already developed, is our mutual trade in manufactures. And the third pillar is the emerging trade in the services sector. If we build three strong pillars to this economic relationship, we will ensure that into the long term we will have a first-class, balanced and integrated economic relationship into the 21st century. Climate change has also been front and centre in my discussions here in Beijing, just as it's been over the last 2 weeks in Brussels with the European Commission, in London with the British government, and in the United States with the US administration. The challenge of climate change is real, and its biggest challenge is to ensure that we get the solution right, because the next generation of Chinese, the next generation of Australians depends on us getting it right. It's not a problem that can be solved by countries in isolation. We need a truly global response, which all nations, all sectors of the economy can play their part. We simply have to make the transition to a lower emissions economy. We need to devote our energies to working out how best to manage the transition. Premier Wen and I agreed today that Australia and China would establish a ministerial-level dialogue on climate change. It will be a forum for us to strengthen our policy dialogue in the context of international negotiations and to cooperate on practical projects that accelerate the use of low emissions technologies. Acting on climate change will bring with it opportunities to develop these new technologies and to commercialise them. New technologies like post-combustion capture and storage that the CSIRO, Australia's scientific and research organisation, has developed and is piloting in a power plant here in Beijing. I'll be visiting that project tomorrow. If this demonstration project is successful, there is enormous potential for the technology to be deployed widely throughout China. It will lower emissions in China and will boost research in Australia. Clean and green is about more than carbon capture, it's about other smart energy technologies too. Australian firms are making their presence felt in these fields around the world, including here in Beijing. And I want to congratulate those that have been successful and offer my encouragement to do further work. As I said at the Climate Change Forum held here in Beijing yesterday by the Global Foundation, when you look at our two countries, and I pointed yesterday at the forum to the two flags in front of the desk that I was sitting at as I spoke, the Australian flag represents a country which is the world's largest coal exporter, and the Chinese flag represents the country which is the world's largest coal consumer. In an age of climate change, our two countries have a unique responsibility to work together on the technology necessary to deal with the great challenge of carbon reduction and, in particular, clean coal technology. I believe our two countries have the technology, the capacity, the political will to strive together in this direction. China depends on that, Australia depends on that, and the world depends on us getting this solution right for the future. Our vision for the Australia-China economic relationship is more than trade, it's more about individual projects. It's also about cooperation and joint projects and investment in both directions. Australia has a consistent record of welcoming foreign investment. Over the past 200 years, Australia has relied on foreign investment to help boost our own economic development. For instance, Japanese investment in our resources sector was critical in the sector's development in the 60s and 70s. Earlier this year, the Australian Treasurer made public a list of criteria used in assessing foreign investment proposals. This was, in effect, a public statement of existing criteria, but to make them transparent. The first consideration, of course, for Australia is Australia's national interest. We welcome investments that are fully commercial and pro-development. We welcome investment in resources infrastructure which will improve our production capacity and help meet China's demand and that of other traditional customers for many years to come. At the same time, our companies are looking for improved access for Australian investment into China. China continues to regulate foreign investment in many sectors. Our economic cooperation will get a real boost if there were more investment opportunities for Australian business in China as well. Through our free trade negotiations, we've been pursuing the question of greater investment access as well. And as we accelerate our FTA negotiations, I look forward to progress on investment. We believe that this is important for the future. Australia remains an economy open to foreign investment, as does China. Both our countries will always argue our national interests, but we believe this is an important pathway to the future. Beyond the economy, I had discussions with our friends in Beijing about China's future role in the world and in the region. Yesterday, I delivered a speech at Beijing University, talking about some aspects of that. China often speaks of the need for a harmonious world, a 和谐世界. The former Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, Bob Zoellick, said a few years ago that he would like to see China become what he described as a global stakeholder, contributing to the rules of the regional and global order. The argument I advanced yesterday is that both these approaches ultimately can be brought together. That is, for there to be a harmonious world, China must also be a participant in the world order and, along with others, build the rules associated with that order. And to go to the United States concept of a responsible stakeholder, therefore, it follows that if all people are participating in a rules-based order, then in fact we move towards a harmonious set of global relationships. Of course, we see a practical manifestation of this work already with China's important work on the six-party talks on the Korean Peninsula. This is important work, and I congratulated the Chinese Vice Minister today for his role in those talks, together with those of the representatives of the other countries, including the United States. China has been a patient convener of these talks for a long time and provided a great mechanism to help deal with this crisis which has occurred on the Korean Peninsula concerning North Korea's nuclear program. I've said repeatedly today and yesterday, I am an optimist about China's future. I am an optimist about the future of the Australia-China relationship. In fact, in my discussions with Vice Premier Li Keqiang today, he said he disagreed with me. He said he was a big optimist about the future of the Australia-China relationship. I then said I disagreed with him, and I said I was a very big optimist about the future of the Australia-China relationship, and we concluded our discussion here. 乐观, 很乐观, 非常乐观. In the process of developing a broad-based relationship, we will at times have differences of opinion, like those that we've expressed yesterday and again today in private discussions with the Chinese leadership on questions of human rights in Tibet. But the point is that our relationship should be strong enough to cope with differences of view, and we should never lose sight of the opportunities that this relationship offers all of us. I know that many of you have already done the hard yards here in China and have had stunning successes in your businesses. Here I speak of the Australians. And for Chinese who are dealing with their opportunities in Australia and their trading relationships, you've done the hard yards as well. You've had to get to know us, and sometimes that can be a challenge. But I congratulate all the business and economic partners assembled in the room here this evening for contributing so much to the lifeblood and the fabric of this important economic relationship. Governments can agree on one thing or another, but the lifeblood of an economic relationship consists of businesses going out there and doing the hard work, making the deals, and ensuring that prosperity is then generated, which can then be shared with our broader population. We have a strong base to build on. My government is committed to helping the economic and political relationship develop as well. We want to partner with Australian and Chinese business sectors as we do. I'd congratulate this chamber in particular for its work, because it is a chamber which has been active in this relationship for so many years. And for those who are representing Chinese firms and their Australian counterparts, you have my congratulations and thanks as well for making this relationship such a successful one. I wish you the very best for the future. Understand for my government that this relationship, this economic relationship, is absolutely fundamental to our shared future. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, I now encourage you all to relax. Enjoy tonight's meal, which features fine Australian wines and produce. Have a good night. Thank you.